9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Well, hey there, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're at. And Happy New Year. It's the first episode of 2021. Welcome to Freethought in Florida. My name is Sarah Ray. I am one of the directors of the Atheist community of Polk County, who produces this show. And I'll be your host. This is Friday, January 8th, 2021, or December 64th, 2020, however you want to look at that. It's been a long year already. But Happy New Year. This is our first episode of 2021, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this more in the coming weeks. But I want you to know there are some exciting things coming to Freethought in Florida. I've been working on trying to bring in some other voices and other perspectives because you're getting tired of hearing me, and that's okay. But we want to bring in some folks from all throughout the Florida landscape to bring their voices and ideas so that it's not just me all the time. I'm testing a solution where we might be able to take some live callers. There's some big stuff on the way. And of course, that growth costs money. So we want to thank our donors to the atheist community of Polk County, but especially to the patrons over at patreon.com/polkatheists. Patreon is another great way to support the atheist community of Polk County and the ongoing production of this show. And all of that money goes right back into the ACPC to support our programs and future developments that we are also working on. So we also know, of course, that not everyone has the finances to donate, and that's okay. People are hurting right now. We get it. But we'd sure appreciate you taking the time to like and subscribe and share out our episodes on social media and stuff with anyone you think might appreciate them. All right. So I'm excited to kick off the new year with some amazing guests. One of my favorite guests, returning champion and friend of the show, no relation, but I've adopted him as my own. Darrel Ray, Dr. Darrel Ray is joining us. You know Darrel, he's the founder and president of Recovering from Religion, founder of the Secular Therapy Project, author of The God Virus and Sex and God. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Ray.
Good to be back. Thanks for having me on, Sarah.
And in this corner, weighing in at... Well, wait a minute. That's a different thing. Also joining us today is Dave Warnock. Many of you know Dave, too. He was a church leader and pastor for over 35 years, a member of the Clergy Project, and including serving on their board until recently retiring after his diagnosis of ALS. You probably know him best now from the Dying Out Loud Project. Dave Warnock, welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Good to see you.
Oh, so excited to have both of you. Now, Dave, the last time we talked, this was mid-year last year, I think, or about this time last year.
Yeah.
Just as that coronavirus bullshit was starting up, and we were trying to get you over here to speak to some of our local groups, and then that just 2020 happened, and we weren't able to do that. So I'm excited to get to be on the show here and chat with you. It's great.
Yeah, me too.
Now I know this question, Dave, leads to an hour-long show all on its own, but how are you doing?
Yes. Well, it's 2020 happened, yeah, and here we are in 2021, and we thought it'd be better, and then wow, here we go. The nation's capital blew up. But physically and emotionally, mentally, I'm hanging in there. Maybe this is the best way to describe that. I'm definitely losing strength in my arms, which is where my ALS is located. I've learned that my particular strain of ALS is probably going to be contained in my hands and arms for a good long time before it travels to the other parts of my body. So I have a longer lifespan in that sense, but I may have part of that lifespan without the use of my arms, which is challenging in and of itself. But other than that, I'm doing okay. I am making good progress on my book. I'm writing my memoir, and I'm really stoked about how that's going. It's coming along really well, and I'm anticipating I'll have it done by end of first quarter this year. We're really tracking well on it. So I'm enthused. I get up every day, and most days are good. Some days are not good, but overall I'm doing okay. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, good to hear it. I mean, I've been following your story for a while, since you really started going on tour to discuss death and dying as an atheist. But I haven't seen any of that lately, so it's good to get an update from you. I appreciate that. And it feels weird to not be talking about all of the things that have happened in the last 24, 48 hours. But we're not going to do that today, as tempting as it is, as much as we all want to. That's not what we're here for.
Right. That would be a sidetrack. That would be a rabbit trail we'd never get out of.
Right. Yeah. So this was actually Darrel's idea. The two of you authored an article together that was published on Medium in the Excommunications channel, entitled "Recovering as Former Clergy." You can find a link to that article in the description of this episode. And so we're gathered here today to sort of peel back the layers on that and get into it more than you can in 3,000 words. And I got to say, I kind of find this topic interesting on a personal level. For myself, a long, long time ago, I fancied myself on the road to seminary. And that was a long, long, long time ago. I have a brother-in-law in the ministry, and so maybe it's sort of easy to kind of put myself into the shoes of someone who may be a clergy person who is waking up and coming out of a religion, and then what? So I really just wanted you guys to sort of have a conversation with minimal interruption from me. I'll sort of throw the ball into the air and let you guys bat it around and jump in when I have questions and thoughts. But so a lot of what we do in the community really is to just help people who have left or are leaving a religious a belief, and that has sort of one set of common waypoints. We talk about healing through the angry atheist phase a lot, right? How do we take that energy and push it into something positive, into humanism? But here you have a unique position of religious leader. And so then to help them step back into the secular world, I think lay folks probably don't realize the unique complexities of that. But even more, if you are a clergy person and you're in that position, you probably don't recognize the effects that your time in ministry has had on your ability to make that transition too. Is that sort of a fair framing of where we start this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's a good framing. Yeah.
So we just jump in. I think Darrel, you came to me with the idea for the article. It was birthed in your brilliant mind, and we wanted to approach it from the duality of our experiences. Darrel coming from the psychologist's viewpoint, and me coming from one who had experience as a pastoral leader over the years. So I think we tried to blend those two viewpoints together, and I think we came out with a pretty good overview of the reality of that experience. Don't you think, Darrel?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting. I knew when I pretty much wrote an article, not this article, an article. And then Dave and I had the opportunity to be together for a week last Christmas, or
about a year
ago. And I knew, okay, I'm coming at this from my perspective. I was never a full-time minister. I did do part-time stuff at one time. So I asked Dave, hey, let's sit down and rewrite this together. And I'll tell you, at the end of that process, it was a totally different article. And it was different because it didn't just have Dave's experience, but Dave's understanding of the experience because of his work with the Clergy Project as well. So it was an interesting experience for me to write that article with you, Dave. And I really appreciate you taking all that time. And
it was an enjoyable process. I remember thinking back how much we enjoyed bouncing back different ideas and edits and re-edits and rewriting and that kind of thing. It was fun.
Right.
And I really drew on my, not only my own personal experience, but my work with the Clergy Project and my knowledge of so many of their stories. and the challenges that that many of them face in trying to assimilate back into the real world, for lack of a better term. I was fortunate in my transition, and throughout my whole pastoral career, if you will. It's funny because it really wasn't that. It was a mix of, sometimes I was in the ministry on staff at a church, sometimes I was in my own business, sometimes. So it was a hodgepodge of, it's all this has kind of come back to life as I've been writing my story and experiencing those things again as I'm reliving years and years ago. And it was really a meandering journey through ministry, but I was always not just a church member going to church. I was always involved. If I wasn't on professional staff somewhere being paid for my efforts, I was in lay leadership or lay ministry where I was leading groups or teaching classes, or so I was always involved in the aspect of being a pastoral leader. So I understand the mentality. And what we were trying to get at, Darrel, is what causes someone to venture down that road? What is it that psychologically is happening in someone that chooses that route? We understand the language of called by God. God called me into this, but we realize now as non-theists that that's really not happening. In our mind, we think it is, but there's a rational reason. What causes someone to want to be a pastoral leader? That's one of the issues we were tackling.
Yeah. And that was an interesting discussion because it actually is kind of a dangerous discussion.
Sure.
Yeah. Sarah, I don't see you, Sarah. Did we lose you? Oh, there you are. Okay. Okay.
Just the background just lets us blabber.
All right. Yeah, it is. It's a dangerous in some ways because if you think about it, you're telling, I mean, when writing this article and if we do come out and talk out loud about it, we're telling somebody what you think you did and what you actually did are very different things.
Yeah. And
now you got to admit to yourself and to a whole lot of people that there was no God calling you. And what was really calling you was something else. Now, what is that something else? That's the scary prospect.
That's interesting because, again, as someone who, and I was probably, I was in high school maybe, writing sermons and speaking at my little small town local church. And had you asked me then, when I was doing, deep Bible study and writing my own sermons, so to speak, as best you can as a teenager, I would have probably told you that I felt this was a calling from God.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think, I think that and like you said, Darrel, it's dangerous because you're basically passing judgment on someone's motivation. And that can be a tricky road to go down. But we tried to couch it in terms like, this is what we think. This is what our understanding is, or this is what, looking back, my experience is. And so it's not trying to tell someone this is why you did a certain thing, but opening up the ideas that maybe let's consider this.
Right. And when you just subtract one little thing, say there is no God, or it's highly unlikely that there is any God calling you to do anything, then what are the other possible motivations here?
Yeah.
And then we list a few, and all of which can be pretty threatening to admit and then to explore.
You're basically admitting that you like attention, that you're a narcissist, that and some of those elements we have to admit there's some truth there.
Right.
I have to look back at my life and think, what was it in me that made me think that there were a group of people that wanted to hear what I had to say every week for an hour? I mean, my God, the narcissism in that alone.
That's why I love Dave. He has no hesitation about just getting it right out there in front.
Well, and those things that you discussed in the article, I thought were interesting because, I had maybe thought of it in terms of, for motivations of why people get into this. We talked about this with David Mercer, was a former clergy and came and spoke at one of our. He we talked about the pastoring is helping people. Like a lot of times people will go into that as a field because there's a desire to help people in some way. And so I think I've always just sort of had that shield on as what I look through, and to sort of open that up and think, oh no, there are some other things just below that layer when you peel the layers back. I thought was very interesting.
Yeah. And if you think about it, once you peel that layer off, or as long as you have that layer on, it gives you permission to do a whole lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
And some of those are just downright wrong or inappropriate, like
Right.
Sure,
telling people shit, that convincing them of non-real kinds of things. One of the quotes that we had in the article, in fact, we lead it off, is that people are pretending like they're not pretending. And that's, if you think about, that's what a minister's doing. That's what an imam is doing. Anybody who's leading in a religious environment is pretending that they're pretending. It's kind of a weird thing when you look at it that way.
And I think we touched on it in the article a little bit. I haven't read it in a while, but and it's been a year since we wrote it, so I barely remember it. We tried to be careful not to paint this with a broad brush, because pastors, ministers, so on are different, and there's different levels, there's different motivations. And it's interesting we were doing this today, because just yesterday, in writing through part of my life, I was with my co-writer. We were finishing up a chapter, and I was reliving a time when I was out in Utah working. I wasn't in ministry yet, and I visited a small Assembly of God church there, and I got to know the pastor. I was barely a baby Christian, a year old in the Lord, and I was impressionable and trying to figure out what this is all about. But I remember and I was telling her as we were writing, and I got emotional talking about it, and I probably will again, because I remember through my life, the pastors, myself included, who I came in contact with and I had experiences with and got to know. And there are so many of them I remember that were just these genuine, compassionate, loving people trying to lead a flock of 50 to 100 people at most, not making any money at it. They're not the charlatans we see and hear about. They're not mega church leaders. They're not doing anything big. They're barely scraping by, but they're doing it with a genuine conviction that they're helping people, they're loving people, they're serving God, they're laying their life down. And I've always found admiration in that. Looking back, I see it with a bit of pity and a real soft spot, thinking, my God, they wasted their life. This one pastor we're writing about had moved his family, 6 kids, from Illinois to a little town in Utah, trying to convert the Mormons. And I've been writing at it from this, and he was failing miserably. Yeah. And his children were floundering and moving on from their learning about their lives in years to come. One of them, a horrible story of a divorce and a murder-suicide, and just a train wreck. But he genuinely thought, he wasn't doing it for any nefarious reasons. He wasn't trying to be a big shot. He wasn't making any money. He really thought this is what God said to do. We know now God's not telling him to do that. We know now that no one needs to convert the Mormons. No one needs to do any of that. But there, and I was just reliving this, I got emotional. I was crying about this experience and knowing these people who were really, really good people. And that's hard to look back on.
It really is, because these people are victims of bad ideas.
Exactly. Good point.
And bad ideas that were put into their heads well before they had critical thinking skills to evaluate those ideas.
Right.
And therein lies a really critical piece that I really want to talk about today, Sarah. And that is what's going on developmentally in people. I've written about this. We work with it every day on Recovery from Religion, and the Clergy Project sees it as well. But people who are inculcated with really bad ideas at really early ages have no facility to critique those ideas. And as those ideas are being injected in their brains are developing. And the average person out there doesn't think about developmental psychology. I mean, no, you didn't wake up this morning thinking, I wonder what stage my brain is developing right now. Nobody does that.
Nope.
And even parents don't realize that their children are going through stages. Now, we look at other animals. You look at insects that go through different stages and pupate and lose their shells and grow wings and all those kinds of things. We really know other animals go through obvious developmental stages. We don't realize that humans are going through just as big a developmental stages. They're just not as obvious. I mean, we can say, well, okay, a person's starting to grow secondary sexual characteristics like breasts or hair, body hair. That's clear sign of a developmental stage. But what we don't think about is the brain itself is going through developmental stages at the age of 1, 2, 3 years old. At 2 or 3 or 4, when language acquisition and language expression is coming around, the kid is being taught a language, but also being taught a religion.
Mm-hmm.
And the brain cannot distinguish between these two activities because at 2, 3 years, 4 years old, you're genetically programmed. I mean, it's a deep, deep genetic programming in us. I mean, it goes right down to our very DNA. Listen to your parents. Obey your parents, because if you don't, you'll be dead. Kids that didn't listen to their parents at 3 and 4 years old got eaten by lions, 20,000 years ago. So we have this very deep programming. And that's why, I mean, you can look, if you've ever worked in child care, I've worked with child care agencies and family practice and stuff like that. And it is you almost never hear of a child 3 and 4 years old who's been abused, a 7-year-old child who's got cigarette burns all over him, a 10-year-old child who's been beaten since many times. Those children will never say anything but, I love my parents. I love my mom. I love my dad. The person who just beat the crap out of them, they will still say, I love them, because that's how deep that programming is. Now you take that into what we're talking about right now and realize that if somebody is deeply programmed that much with a bad idea and then goes on to want to help people learn that bad idea, which is really what we are if we're ministry. Anyway, I'll stop right there. Dave, what's your thought on that?
Well, no, I think that's an important, you bring a really valuable insight into the makeup of this. And I think that's what we were trying to tap into with the article, was the experiential element that I bring into it, and then the psychological development element that you bring into it. And there's just a lot that I know I'm in touch with a lot of clergy, former clergy, through the Clergy Project, that I've gotten to know over the last few years. And all of our stories are very, very similar. They differ in terms of our experience. I was fortunate that I wasn't a professional on-staff clergy when I deconstructed my faith. I had already transitioned out of my last position with a church into secular work, and so I didn't have to try to make that secular transition and find a way to make a living, which is one of the biggest issues that the clergy face when leaving the faith. And so that's a whole other element. But the whole process of reformatting the way that we think and the way we look at things, the average Christian who deconstructs their faith has that challenge on one level. The clergy member has it on a double level, because you have devoted your life to this idea, as you call it, this bad idea. And not only devoted your life, you've made a commitment to try to instill that bad idea in other people. So you've got this guilt almost that you deal with. I know many clergy who have dealt with the idea of, oh my God, I spent years pounding these bad ideas into people and convincing them of things that I now find repulsive. And there's a lot of guilt that they deal with. And I've tried to, I know the Secular Therapy Project's good for that, because they help ministers unpack that and come to the realization, no, you were just doing the best you could at the time.
Mm-hmm.
You learn how you do better.
I might add there too, though, when you've been baked into this culture, right? I want to say a lot, but almost all of these religious cultures also carry with them, a sense of skepticism towards secular therapy, and
yes.
So now you're facing these questions, and your first thought is never probably, oh, let me go find a secular evidence-based therapist, right? You don't have the toolkit to know what to do with your situation.
No, it was biblical counseling. That's what we called it.
Yeah.
Or pastoral counseling. And I did tons of it. And in no way was I qualified. But I would read from the Bible, I would pray, I would get wisdom from God, blah, 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 and I would pass that on. And I was doing more harm than good most of the time.
I think the clergy's got, well, let me go back here. We wrote this article with two audiences in mind. Obviously, the clergy themselves in mind, because we want to help them. We want to help them realize why they may be experiencing what they're experiencing emotionally and psychologically. But with the second audience, and probably just as important, are the people who know somebody who's a clergy, who have a relationship with them, whose father was a clergy or mother. We wanted them to understand, because I've had secular friends of mine that are, otherwise very compassionate, very understanding, tell me, why the hell are we helping clergy? They fucked everybody up. Why are we helping them? I'm serious. A psychiatrist that I have a lot of respect for came back to me one day when I was talking about how Recover from Religion works and helps the Clergy Project, because we work together with them. And that was their response, is, why the hell are we helping them? They fucked us all up, or fuck people all up all the time. So, I mean, we have to realize that these people got into the ministry because they wanted to help somebody. Mm-hmm. And unlike you, Sarah, I actually went into the seminary and I got a 2-year seminary degree. At the end of it, I realized it was all bullshit, but I still did it. Yep. And the reason I did it was because I wanted to help people. Right. And frankly, the idea of becoming a psychologist had not occurred to me at that moment until I got out of the seminary. Sure. I missed what you said, Sarah. What did you say?
And you're a narcissist.
Well, okay. Thank you.
No, I'm the narcissist. Darrel's a good guy.
Right.
Well, there's no shame in saying, look, why do we do this? Okay, element of it, we like attention. I'm not gonna. Neither Dave or I are going. Why do you do this, Sarah? You like attention.
Give us a microphone, man. That's all we need, right?
Yeah. Yes. So there's nothing wrong with admitting that. Every human being on this planet probably has some level of narcissism in them. That's not the problem.
Right.
The problem was an abuse of bad ideas and abuse of other people in the name of those bad ideas.
And you touched on it, Darrel. And you're like me. I'm in touch with a lot of ex-Christians on chat rooms and different platforms, and in person and live, and knowing personally. There is a lot of damage that's been done in the name of Jesus, in the name of religion, and well-meaning ministers who are misguided and are proliferating bad ideas. I mean, I'm thinking of a personal friend of mine who suffered horrible abuse at the hands of a family member, and then the family member was supposed to be exonerated from all of his misdeeds because he got saved, so to speak. He found God, and the minister kept telling her, no, you gotta let this go. You gotta forgive and forget, because his sins are washed white as snow. And this just was years of horrible abuse, and it nearly ruined her, and she nearly ended her life because of it. And so all of that based upon the idea that Jesus miraculously changes someone, and the minister comes in and says, and so that compounds the damage done, because you've got this religious authority figure who's pronouncing something clean that's in no way clean. And so she's got the damage done from the family member and then the damage done from the minister, and it's just pounding on her, and the abuse just multiplies because people don't understand what's really happening, and you've got amateurs doing what professionals should do.
Right.
And a lot of ministers, to build on what Dave just said, a lot of ministers, when they get out, they look back and say, fuck, I really messed a lot of people up.
Oh yeah.
And then they've got to deal with their own guilt and some degree shame about that. Even though they were doing it with the best of intentions, even the religionists know the best of intentions or pave the road to hell. What's that old saying my grandmother used to say?
The road to hell is paved with good
intentions. Right. So in some ways, it's true. Good intentions don't amount to much.
I've experienced that. I felt the guilt and regret, and I've learned to put it aside. The Maya Angelou quote I refer to all the time: "Do the best you can do until you know better, and then when you know better, do better." Right. And this is me doing better. But I there was a couple of years after I'd let go of my faith, I ran into a former church member at a store once, and I had provided them with some horrible marital counseling because I just horrible. And I realized it, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? And I saw this person in the store, and I just walked up to him and said, I'm so sorry. I want you to know I'm sorry. I was wrong. I thought I was right. I thought I was doing right, but I've learned that I'm wrong, and I apologize. And they were like, oh, thank you. So, I experienced that guilt, that, oh my God, what did I do?
Yeah.
But I thought I was doing right. That's the thing.
Right.
And it was from a good motivation anyway.
Yep. Yeah. So we're sort of starting to get into some of those stumbling blocks, some of those things that as you're coming out as a religious leader, that you have to overcome and deal with. And so if you want to get into some of that a little bit, in a little bit more depth, you're talking about dealing with grief. You touched a little bit earlier on just returning to the secular world. Like, how do I get a job when I've been trained? This is all I know how to do, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Lots of practical issues that Dave can speak to much better than I can.
Well, it's a huge challenge. There are no easy answers to that. I've known of several friends of mine who've managed to finally get on a different career path, but it took time, and sometimes you have to go back and get re-educated. There are some grants available to help with that. The Clergy Project is involved with some people who help in that regard, but it can be a real challenge to just find a way to provide for your family. And to that point, I've known clergy who've stayed in the ministry who no longer believe, who have not come out of the closet, so to speak, because if they did, they'd lose their job and their ability to provide for their family. And that's the most horrible place to be.
And many of them will lose their retirement too. Some churches absolutely throw you under the bus if you're not a member in retirement. So there's, and a lot of people don't realize it, but most churches do not contribute to Social Security. Right. So ministers don't have any Social Security contributions to rely upon when they retire or when they leave the ministry. It's the U.S. government allows ministers to get away with churches basically not to. Yeah. Now ministers could still contribute, as I understand it, David, but they'd have to contribute both sides, the employer side and the employee side.
There's all kinds of loopholes written in the tax code for ministers, and people don't realize this. There were times when I was on staff and my salary would not be, they had a way of folding in a housing allowance to be a certain percentage of your income. The housing allowance would not be taxed, and so it made my income much lower on paper, which meant I paid less taxes. But when it comes down to Social Security, which means I'm going to get less benefit, right. And all that's built in to assist the minister to get away with paying taxes. The church's religion is just getting a free ride when it comes to taxes in this country, and then they want to cry persecution. Give me a break.
I'd like to step back to the notion of developmental psychology, because I think therein lies an important understanding for people to move on. People get stuck sometimes because of abuse, because of trauma, and I'm talking religious trauma in this case. People can get stuck at developmental stages. And we all know, if you are ever being a parent, you know what the word terrible twos means.
Oh yes.
Yeah. If you're a parent, your kid goes through the terrible twos.
Mine are 10 and 5, and the 5 is 15.
Oh. Yeah.
This is coffee, okay?
Into the bourbon. I'll pull early there, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
So just that one little example says, okay, you know, as a parent that your child is going through a developmental stage, and it's a stage related to becoming more independent, asserting themselves within their environment. They now have enough competence to know, but don't realize they're incompetent. Let me drive the car, Dad. I can do it better than you. And they're 3 years old. So I actually had a son that could just about do that to me. He was, he thought he could drive the car better at 5 years old than I could. So but if you look at the brain actually goes through explosions of development at different critical times, starting at the fetal level, of course, but then again at other times in the 3 to 4 year range, and then again in the 7 year range, and about 12 years old. And then again, I mean, the male brain, for example, is not fully developed until about 25, and the female brain not fully developed until about 21 or 22. So we're still seeing developmental phases happening. Well, if you are a minister and you're being hammered with bad ideas at 12 years old, for example, about your sexuality, let's say you're gay and you're being hammered about. I mean, we've Dave and I both know many people who are ex-ministers who are now LGBTQ in some sort.
Yeah.
And they had to go there. They were developmentally delayed or developmentally stuck. Now, most of us know, we've heard of people getting out of religion and, quote, going wild, and that's where the whole notion of you just want to be an atheist because you want to sin.
Yeah.
That's where that oftentimes comes from. No, it's what is actually happening. And I'm going to throw out my hypothesis, and I think I got good reasons to support this. What's actually happening is you're making up for a developmental delay. I've had so many people at 30, 40, 50 years old go back and start acting like a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
Of every persuasion, it doesn't matter. They have to go back. It's almost like I have to go back and experience what I missed. But that's really not quite what's happening. What they're doing is their brains are saying, hey, we've got to go back and start here and move forward. So I'm 50 years old. I got to go back to 16. And now I may do it in 4 years instead of 40 years, but I'll get through it. And that's when people realize you're not doing anything wrong. Your brain is trying to make up for something it should have experienced 20 years ago. Now you can go into therapy. A good therapist will understand this, and a good therapist will say, okay, so now you have to go back and pull up these developmental phases that you missed. Let me help you with that so you don't get in trouble. Because some people can really get themselves in trouble, maybe doing drugs, maybe getting into sexual relationships they shouldn't get into, or because it's bad for their own mental health, those kinds of things.
That hits home for me as a trans person. We often talk about in the trans community, like when you finally socially transition and start living your authentic life, a lot of us go through, and we call it a second puberty.
Yes.
We're going back and trying to recapture a lot of that.
Well, I've said that I felt like I was living my 20s and my 60s because I deconverted in my mid-50s, late 50s, and then I rebooted my life at the age of 61 when I made the decision to leave my marriage and really start my life over in a way that I felt like would allow me to be my authentic self. I like that phrase you used, Sarah. It really Christianity, even, and not all Christianity is the same. So I want to be clear. When I always make it a point, I'm talking about evangelicalism, the fundamentalist arm of Christianity, of Protestantism that is controlling and manipulative and demanding and riddled with certainty and so on. That was my experience, and so it is a terrible case of arrested development. In fact, the language of the Bible is all about come as a little child, and never be curious and never grow up. And we're children, and we have a father, and you're not supposed to grow up. You're not supposed to think for yourself. You're taught that your thinking is of the devil, and you can't trust your own mind, and so all of that factors into how you develop or how you don't develop. In fact, as I'm working on my book, I feel like I'm plugging my book. I'm not. It's just all fresh in me because I've been working on it so much. The title I think I'm going to use is a reference to that, and it's a scripture in 1 Corinthians that says, when I was a child, I thought like a child, I spoke like a child, I understood like a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish sins. I'm going to call my book, But When I Became a Man. Because that's exactly how it feels, that I finally grew up out of something that was trying to keep me immature, childish, and uncurious.
Yeah.
And then to top on that, you add the clergy element. Not only are you not developing emotionally and psychological, like you touched on, Darrel, you're not developing career-wise. You're not developing in a way that is going to really benefit, and not only yourself but society and other people. You're part of the thing that's holding society back. You're keeping society undeveloped with bad ideas, and that's a big statement to make. I know that, and ministers would. I mean, if my older brother, who's a minister, evangelical minister, saw this, he'd lose his shit. He'd want to fight me. I know it's a strong statement to make, but I really believe it.
Well, I think David is being a little too narrow, maybe a little bit too kind here. I think this is I'm sure you don't really disagree with this, Dave. I think limiting this to evangelicals is way too narrow. The Catholic Church, obviously.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything that would developmentally stunt someone more than the notion of lifelong celibacy in a priest. That's like the most perverted sexual idea. People ask me, what's the most perverted thing? I say, well, the most perverted thing is being a celibate Catholic priest, because that's just crazy. And that will drive them crazy, and that will create developmental issues that we see in people all the time. So
you're right. It's all across the board.
Yeah,
you're right.
It could be Islam as well. It can be Mormons. Mormons don't even have ministers, and yet I think some of them are just as developmentally screwed up. I mean,
I speak to that. I isolate that particular arm because that was my experience. That's what I know the most.
Yeah,
about, and I try to stay in my lane.
Yeah, I get out of my lane all the time.
Well, no, that's not true, Darrel. Your lane is the psychological element of this. So you really have the framework and the understanding to speak to all of those different things. I think you're exactly right when you say that. Yeah. I don't have that. I don't want to presume into knowledge or understanding that I just don't have, because that's just not something I think I should do. But I think you do have that coming at it from the viewpoint of a psychologist. You can speak to all the elements of religion.
Well, one element I do want to speak to, and that is that what are the symptoms that, I hope we've got some people listening right now that are actually clergy or ex-clergy. Mm-hmm. I'm sure we've got a lot of people that aren't, but I think it's good to be aware of when you might need to. I almost can't imagine a minister getting out of the ministry and not needing therapy, period. I just almost can't imagine that.
Yeah.
Well, so you come out on the other side healthy and productive and
if you want to really be healthy, right?
Yeah,
right. If you do. So I just want to put a few ideas in people's minds to be self-aware about. For example, if you find yourself continually going back to fear of hell, or maybe I'm wrong, or I just wish I could get this song out of my head.
Yeah.
It's always there about Jesus loving me or whatever. That is that, or maybe you're constantly being triggered by Jesus saves, or you're going to hell billboards around your neighborhood, or you drive by your old church and you get a flood of negative emotions. I mean, there's all sorts of things that might literally trigger you. Not everything I just named means you're experiencing trauma, but it would be a sign that you might want to pay attention. And if you're getting these things and they're disrupting your life, they're preventing you from moving on, they're preventing you from learning new skills or going back to college or working in your marriage or your relationships, then you probably are experiencing some kind of religious trauma.
I agree.
I think there's lots of people out there in the Clergy Project, for example, that are dealing with religious trauma almost every day of their life. And I want to encourage them. It is perfectly normal to experience these bad negative effects.
Yeah.
Just like it would be for a soldier coming back from Iraq who watched two of his buddies or her buddies get killed or maimed by an IED. That's traumatic. Well, we don't realize that being beaten, literally or figuratively, with religion for decades will create brain trauma. Your amygdala will change. Your hippocampus is going to change in the way it responds to your environment, and there's almost no way to change that without outside help. That's my message, Sarah. I want people to listen.
That's so powerful to say that, Darrel. I experienced that personally, and I saw a therapist as I was deconstructing. It was a couple of year process, and then several years after that, I was still traumatized by it and the disruption of my family and the things that my deconversion cost me personally. And I saw a therapist, a qualified therapist, for quite a while. And I remember him telling me one time, he said, "You have severe PTSD." And he said, and I forget the kind he called it, but he said, it's the worst kind because it's not the kind that comes from a single traumatic event. It's
called complex PTSD.
That's it. Thank you, doctor. It's worse because it's a repetitive, residual thing, a pounding, like you said, that's over and over. It's like getting blow after blow after blow instead of one big cataclysmic event. And it just hammers you down emotionally. And I was just beaten. I was beaten down mentally and emotionally. It took years to come out of that. And I want to touch on what you said, Darrel. I like whoever's listening, ex-clergy, ex-Christian, whatever. If you're experiencing what Darrel described, these things that trigger you, driving, and I used to go through this, and I used to couldn't hear a song. If I was in a restaurant and they played the Christian worship music, which some of them insist on doing, I would get up to leave. I would, because it would just like go all over me. And I tested myself recently. I went back to West Texas where I had my conversion experience. I had a little reunion with some of my old Christian friends who are all still Christians. And I drove out across Oklahoma into West Texas. This was back this summer. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to play some of the music that I used to listen to in that era. Love Song and Larry Norman and these things that I just was submersed in. I just want to hear it just to kind of re-experience it. And I thought, is this going to trigger me? And it didn't. It didn't have any effect on me. It was just like this nostalgia, like, oh, wasn't that sweet? That was a sweet time. But it didn't like cause me any anxiety or stress. And so if those things cause that in you, if seeing a certain person or going in a certain neighborhood or hearing a song or whatever, if that causes something in you, some kind of reaction, please reach out, get some help. And I've referred a lot of people to that. You mentioned the fear of death, the fear of hell. I get a lot of messages to that effect now. And I've referred a lot of people to RFR and secular therapy. And I said, there's people that can help you get some help.
Well, to build on that, there are treatments for this, and I want people to know that whether you're an ex-minister or not, it's irrelevant. If you experience some kind of PTSD, then there's ways to treat this, and it doesn't take years. In fact, the amazing thing is, just in the last 10 years, there have been incredible treatment protocols that are now available, and many well-trained therapists know how to implement these and help you move through these so you won't be triggered. I mean, what Dave just described is the result of good treatment. Yeah. And now I'm not going to downplay the hard work Dave went through to get there, but he had to have a well-trained therapist, or he wouldn't have gotten
it. I could have done it on my own. I didn't have the tools.
Right. It's like you know, for example, you don't know how to read a map, but you know maps exist. Mm-hmm. And so you find somebody who knows how to read the map, you put them in the passenger seat and say, you read the map, I'll drive the car.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. And the therapist knows how to read the map and knows how to help you get through that map. You don't need to know the map because you don't go to a PhD in psychology. You don't need that. Mm-hmm. But you do need somebody that knows how to do that.
Yeah.
So that's my important message, I think, Sarah, to anybody listening today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe one other divergence from that is, we started off sort of talking about there's two audiences here, really. And so I feel like we've just covered very well clergy folks who are working through some of these things. Let's talk a little bit more then about clergy adjacent. Like, I'm thinking the community. When I think about my role as an organizer of a local community, a lot of what I'm doing right now is like, guys, calm down. Like, believers are not the enemy. Okay. Let's focus on some good things. Let's go out and make a positive impact in the world. We don't have to spend our days attacking believers and belief. There are other things we can do. And so when I think about being in a community and possibly having a brush life experience with someone who is clergy and walking through these steps and dealing with all of those years of trauma and regret and all of those things, for my people, right? Assume good intent, apply a little grace, right? There's a piece of humanity that we're, and this is a whole other show, but we've talked ad nauseum about the divisiveness that we're seeing right now and the us versus them, and just all of this, we're being just so pulled apart, and that there is something that we need to come back to connect us to, to be thoughtful of other people and what they're going through. And so maybe that would be my, for those of us who are adjacent.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sarah. I do have, like we touched on earlier, I have a lot of connections online, mostly with people who still have to deal with family members, friends who are enmeshed in this. They may have a parent who's a pastor, or a brother like I do. I don't have much interaction with them anymore because they pretty much distanced themselves from me. And we had our arguments early on in the process. So we kind of don't get tangled up in that much anymore. But I know some people are still in that, or they can't come out as an atheist or an unbeliever because they would experience the backlash from family. So there's a lot of ongoing anxiety and stress and trauma associated with that. So how do we best help them, Darrel? What do you think?
Well, I think there's a number of different ways, a number of different avenues that people can do it. The first thing is, if you know somebody that's going through that, let them know about Recover from Religion. Have them chat in with us and talk to one of our agents, and they can help guide you to resources to get through this. And if you need more, they can help you find a secular therapist on top of that. There's lots of good books and things. Yeah, we were talking about developmental stages, and somebody mentioned the angry atheist. I think maybe Sarah, it was you that mentioned that. That is such a common thing that we even have a name for it, the angry atheist phase. Yeah. Well, that is a developmental phase, if you will. And people don't realize what they're going through.
You just don't want to get stuck there.
Right. Right.
And I know people who've been stuck there for 20 years.
Oh God, yes. And it's destructive. It's doing them more harm. That's the thing I don't understand. You're
Right.
not helping yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
But I want people to recognize what we're talking about in themselves, whether they're ex-clergy or they're not,
Right.
whether they're involved with an ex-clergy or not.
Yep.
And then go get some help, talk to somebody. There's nothing wrong with the angry atheist phase. It's just not a phase you want to stop with. You want to keep moving forward.
Mhm.
And I think what I heard from you, Sarah, is having some compassion for ourselves, compassion for those who are going through this or went through that.
Yeah.
And that's what our communities can bring here.
Yeah.
I love our community here in Kansas City, the Oasis community. And I've been down your neck of the woods, Sarah. I love the communities all around there in the central area of Florida and some of the. Well, I even went on the Freethought cruise a few years ago. It's all great to have, but I think we need to be careful about having compassion for those people who are still dealing with this, especially the new people, because when they come into your group and they're still in the angry atheist phase, that's when they need to find a recover from religion group, because we can help you get through that phase a lot faster. And then you can move on and join Sarah's group, or join Sarah's group, but don't dump everything there. Come to us and dump it on us. We have broad shoulders for dealing with the angry atheist phase.
Yeah. No, it's good. I refer a lot of people to RFR. I think it's awesome what you're doing.
And I will just throw a real quick plug out here as we're wrapping up. Separate and apart from all of the other things that I'm involved in, we are working on we're approved and in the hopper to have a RFR peer support group for folks in Polk County, kind of here locally. So that's going to launch, sometime this year.
Good.
And if you're out there and you're not, like, if there's not one around you and you're interested in setting something up, seriously, like, this stuff is, I can attest now. I've been through the training. I've done all the things. Like, it's not difficult to do. If you just have, we're back to the beginning. If you have a desire to help people, you can reach out to RFR and volunteer for the chat line and be involved in a support group. There's lots of ways to get involved as a volunteer too.
A lot of our support groups are online now, so you can literally sign on and be in a support group with Boston from Australia. We have that all the time.
Right.
But once we go back to live, we may not be online quite as much.
Well, the need is only going to increase. A lot of evangelicals had hitched their wagon to the Trump train, and as that's coming off the rails, there's going to be some disillusionment, disappointment. We thought God had spoken, we thought God had given us direction, and now these prophecies have not come. A lot of them will double down and drill deeper. We know that, but there are going to be those that had some doubts and questions before, hitched their wagon to it, and realized this train is not where I thought it was going. Yeah. And they're going to be looking for some answers. So this need is only going to increase, in my opinion. Right.
Sarah, if I could have one last thing. Are we getting over it in 1 hour? Is that what we're supposed to do?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I just want to say we haven't even touched on sex and sexuality much. We just barely touched it. We could have a whole nother show on that, of course. And Dave and I can talk forever about that. But the main thing is when you look at developmental phases, sexuality is a big part of those developmental phases. And most of the clergy I have ever come across are sexually dysfunctional in more than one way. They've got bad ideas about human sexuality, and they themselves practice bad practices in their relationships and they hate their bodies. Even if they may be out of religion, they still hate their bodies because, of course, they were taught my body is my enemy. So I would strongly encourage ministers, and I am going to plug my book here, Dave, without any shame. Get out there and read Sex and God.
Well, you actually have one. You actually have one that's finished, so you can plug it. I don't.
Oh, well, because I think the stuff that's, whether you read my book or not, look at your sexuality, look at your assumptions about sex and sexuality, and start getting with our current understanding about biology and evolution and psychology, there's so much to learn. And it will make your life so much happier. You won't be fighting yourself all the time. And what we know is a lot of the problems Christians have with their own sexuality is a direct result of the bad ideology itself. I mean, for example, the notion of porn addiction. There's no such thing.
Right.
But if you think you're a porn addict, it's probably because you were programmed and diagnosed by a Christian. Your wife, your Sunday school teacher, whoever is the one that diagnosed you, because there's no psychologist going to diagnose you as a porn addict. And if they do, get out of there quick because they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Anyway, that was my other plug is you want to understand what's going on with Trump right now. That's the book to read. I was predicting this shit 12 years ago when I wrote that book. I unfortunately predicted way too well. It has come true so much more. I mean, how can we have people walking around with Jesus signs in a political
right?
Yeah. So anyway, there's another story. We agreed we weren't going to do that today. I just want people to know that where the resources are.
Dr. Darrel, a prophet. All right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Prophet Darrel.
Only this type of prophet that actually prophesied and it came true.
All right. Dave, final words from you?
This has been good. I appreciate you putting this format together, Sarah. That it needs to be talked about. We kind of diverged from the clergy element of it. It's a big part of it, but it's an overarching problem with the psychological undeveloped mind and emotions that we've all experienced coming out of whatever kind of religion. It's not. You're right, Darrel. It's not just evangelicalism. When you're talking about sex, I was thinking the obsession all religions have with sex is just fucking weird.
Yep.
Let's just admit it. Why do you need to cut a person's penis?
Yep.
Come on. And so, that alone should tell us there's something really off with this when you look at just that one element.
Absolutely. Well, I could talk to you both for hours, and let's just plan to do it again sometime.
That's right.
And Dave too. We had some questions in the chat that were a little off topic. Folks want to know about death and dying as an atheist and that sort of thing. So maybe we can put a pin in that and come back and hit that topic for another show. But
and let them know, anyone who's listening, I'm open. Send me a message. I respond to messages. I'm not a big shot, and so if you've got a question I can help you with, please reach out. I had someone. I was just thinking about this with RFR. I'm wondering. I know because of the internet, you can talk to someone anywhere in the world. You can chat with them, and so I had a message from a young lady in Sweden a few weeks ago, dealing with death and depression and just finding inspiration in what I was talking about, realizing that if I can enjoy life in my position, then surely she can get her shit together. Kind of, that was the overall attitude. And I'm thankful. I'm so thankful to be able to do that in this position. And so anyone that I can help with a question or conversation, please reach out. I'm wide open.
how do you want people to get in touch with you?
There's an email on the Dying Out Loud website, daveoutloud.com. Go there. You can send me a message through that, and then we can email from there and go from there. So it's all on the website.
Awesome, and I will put a link to that
Okay.
in the show notes as well. Darrel, where can everybody find you and all of your things?
I didn't go to recoveryfromreligion.org and just hit the contact us button, and that'll get to me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm all over on Facebook and Twitter and those kinds of things.
Great. Well, I appreciate you both for all the work that you're doing out in the world, but especially this focus on helping clergy re-enter secular society. And I appreciate you for joining us here to help educate folks, and we'll do it again.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
My pleasure.
Bye.
All right. Such a good time with Dave and Darrel. I love them so much. Hey, before we wrap up the show here, I do want to remind you again, we have some exciting things coming up. Changes to the way we live stream. We're working on bringing in some new, some fresh co-hosts with some different perspectives and different topics. And ways that we'll handle things. So look forward to that in the next, I don't know, maybe week or so. We're trying to get this thing onto more of a solid schedule here, so that you can expect us and we'll be here for you. But that's going to do it for this episode. Freethought in Florida is available on YouTube, Facebook, and most podcast players. You can find all the subscribe links at our website as well. Please like, subscribe, and share out the episodes and help us reach a broader audience. You can find all about the ACPC or make a donation at polkatheists.org and follow us on all the social media at Polk Atheists. And of course, please remember the 3 most important things. There's still a fucking pandemic going on out there, guys. Don't touch anything. Wash your hands. Wear your mask. Be safe, everybody. And we'll see you on the next Freethought in Florida.